So when they ask you to preach, it all sounds like a really good idea and feels like a really, really good idea until you stand right here. Right when I walk up on stage. You did, you covered it, we're good. Every time I come up here, I always feel like I have to speed read through my message. I'm going to really try hard not to do that today. Also, in very awkward moments, I've been told I like to panic talk. So, yeah, I do. I do say really stupid things too when I panic talk, so you're in for a treat today. But with two negatives makes a positive, so we're good. So if you're uncomfortable and I panic talk say something stupid, makes it positive, so we're good. Yeah. But this fear but the fear of saying something, not saying anything at all, is, sorry, let me start again. But this fear of saying something to everybody shouldn't stop me from saying anything at all. So I'm going to try it today, my best again, as I always do. And this is why I have a script, and I try and stick to it, because otherwise if I go off script, we're not in a good spot. But this past winter, I went through a very in-depth study of the book of Jonah, and it turned out to be way more than I thought it was. There's so much in this book that I didn't realize was there. Previously, I thought this book was actually a really great picture of how God can use anybody, like Jonah, somebody who appears to maybe not really care, and then go and say something really little, and then God changes and makes the whole nation, or the whole city of Nineveh into a way better place. So I thought this was showing God's great ability to use unskilled, unwilling, and sinful people. And that is true, but there's way more to it. It connects into the Bible on a so much different level. Other than when Jesus mentions it, I think you can have that on your minds as well. And this is what we're going to explore today. There's so much more to the story than meets the eye, but you all know it fairly well. But if you haven't, I have a really short kids video of it, and so we're going to show a really short kids video. Yeah. You want to get the lights on stage?
Do you need to turn off the back?
No, just the stage one should be fine.
Heroes of the Bible, Jonah. This is Jonah. Jonah was a prophet. That means it was his job to tell people what God told him to say.
Yep.
One day, God told Jonah to go to Nineveh because the people of Nineveh were doing bad things. But instead, Jonah ran away. And went to the port to board a ship going the other way. He was hoping to get away from God. He sailed for a place called Tarshish. While he was at sea, God sent a great and powerful wind over the sea that caused a storm that seemed like it would break the ship apart. Fearing for their lives, the sailors tried everything they could think of to save the ship. Meanwhile, Jonah was sound asleep. So the captain went down and said, "How can you sleep at a time like this? Get up and pray to your God. Maybe he will help us." Then the crew figured out that Jonah was the reason for the storm. And they asked him, "Who are you? Why is this happening to us?" Jonah told them who he was and that he worshiped the one true God who made the sea. Then he told the sailors to throw him in the sea so the storm would stop.
No, why?
The sailors still tried to escape the storm, but it was no use. So they asked God for forgiveness and threw Jonah into the sea. The storm stopped at once.
Whoa!
The sailors were amazed at God's power and they vowed to serve him. Now God sent a great fish to swallow Jonah.
Great.
And Jonah was inside the fish for 3 days and nights. Jonah prayed to God from inside the fish, and God ordered the fish to spit Jonah out.
Yeah.
God told Jonah again to go to the city of Nineveh to tell them what God had said about them.
I get it.
This time, Jonah obeyed God and went to Nineveh to deliver God's message. people of Nineveh stopped doing bad things and turned to God. They were saved because they listened to the message that God had given Jonah.
What's that? I know, right? We're going to actually continue off of this one, but way later on. It completely misses chapter 4, which is very unfortunate. But I kind of find this video really interesting because it almost depicts Jonah as being a hero of the Bible, whereas he really didn't do anything right in this chapter other than go to Nineveh. Yeah, that's it. So he went to Nineveh. So that's the whole gist of the story. But I've titled this message, The Tale of Two Cities. Jonah chapter 1, verse 1 to 3. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for the evil has come before me. But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish, so he paid the fare and went down into it to go with him to Tarshish away from the presence of the Lord. Okay. I'm going to say that I have ESV on my thing here, and this is NIV up to slide 8. So if it doesn't follow along, that's why. I made the slide this morning. I didn't have time to change it. So, anyway, this morning I'm going to figuratively take you on a boat ride through the Old Testament, in a way. We're going to go through Genesis, because the first time Nineveh is ever mentioned in the Bible is brought to you in Genesis 10, chapter 10, verse 6 to 12, after Noah got off the boat. The sons of Ham, Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush, Seba, Havilah, Sabata, Rama, and Sabata. Sorry, these names are going to be really bad out of my mouth, but anyways. The sons of Rama, Sheba, and Dedan. Cush was the father of Nimrod, who became a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That is why it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The first centers of his kingdom were Babylon, Uruk, Akkad, and Calneh in Shinar. From that land he went to Assyria, where he built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah, and Rezin, which is between Nineveh and Calah, which is the great city. So we have Nimrod, a mighty warrior. He's the one who built Nineveh. No, this is not the first city to ever actually be built. The first city to be built was by Cain in Genesis chapter 4, after he had murdered Abel. In Genesis 4, verse 10, we read that Abel's innocent blood cries out to God from the ground, to which God punishes Cain. Cain says his punishment is way too big for him to handle, and so then God places protection over Cain, that if anyone is to kill him or harm him, is punished sevenfold. Then after this, Cain builds a city. Sorry, I'm catching myself up here. I'm going off script again. This is the first city to be ever built, but it's built by a murderer. We can see Cain's descendants. After this, we see Cain's descendants. The one to mention is Lamech. Whoops, wrong button. There we go. Lamech. And Lamech is worse than Cain. He murdered somebody and said, if Cain is avenged 7 times, then I am avenged 77 times. Skipping to Genesis chapter 6, verse 1 to 4, we have a weird occurrence here, where the sons of God, also known as spiritual beings, taking daughters of man, and then their kids are known as mighty men. I don't know if you can read it in there. It's somewhere in there. Anyway, where else have we heard of a mighty man? Nimrod. Nimrod is a mighty man. And Nimrod is also the one who built Nineveh. Sorry, this is going to get boring for a little bit here. But before this, God sends a flood. We all know that story. God sends a flood to wipe out the earth. And after this flood, Jonah builds an altar. Or Noah, not Jonah. Noah. I knew I was going to do that. Noah then builds an altar, and God realizes man is no different before the flood than they are after the flood. So the same reason he did the flood is because of sin on the earth. The innocent blood was crying out to him. Because sin was on the earth, he was sick of it. He created a flood. After the flood, he's like, man's no different. So they're still sinful, so I'm never going to flood the earth again. So the same reason he did the flood is the same reason why he promised never to do the flood again. Interesting thing to think about. Now, how does any of this have to do with Nineveh? This is where it all starts. Innocent blood being spilled by sinful men. These men have built cities to rule and protect themselves. These cities have been built on innocent blood. And innocent blood cries out to God from the ground. And when this happens, God chooses someone to intercede for that. How many chosen ones can you think of in the Old Testament who are called by God because of innocent blood crying out from the ground? To list a few, we have Abraham in Genesis 18, verse 18 to 24. God has chosen Abraham. Sodom and Gomorrah has sinned, and the evil cries out to God. And Abraham intercedes for the city of Sodom. We have Moses in Exodus chapter 2, born during the time of Pharaoh, who killed innocent babies, in the fear of Israelites' population growing too much to overpower them. Wherever there is innocent blood being spilled and rising up to God, God appoints a chosen one to intercede. Lastly, maybe not lastly, but maybe an important one to notice is the nation of Israel in Deuteronomy 7, chapter 6. For you, Israel, are a people holy to the Lord your God. For the Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possessions out of all these people who are on the face of the earth. God has chosen the nation of Israel to intercede for the world. As we know, Jesus came from the nation of Israel, or came out of the nation of Israel. We know Jesus is God's chosen one, the Messiah that we do not deserve, called to intercede for us. He was perfect in every way. But we all know how it went for him. He died on the cross. So now we have a perfect image of a chosen one, someone who's too great, who the people don't deserve. Now imagine a chosen one that is worse than the people he is trying to intercede for. Welcome to the story of Jonah. Jonah chapter 1, verse 1 to 2. God calls Jonah, his chosen one, to go to Nineveh. Because why? Because of the great evil. You got that. You're following. I'm surprised. Jonah has to go to Nineveh. God calls Jonah to Nineveh because of the great evil that is in that nation, or in that city. God has to do something about it. But the question is, why is he running to Tarshish? Why Tarshish? Like, what's so we know why he has to go to Nineveh. Now we got to figure out why is he running to Tarshish. There's more to it than that. Before we get to that, Jonah is a prophet, obviously. We're going to talk a little bit about Jonah very briefly. And he has a prophecy in 2 Kings, verse 14 to 25, about the borders being restored. So this is Solomon's kingdom. Yeah, 2 Kings 14:25. I didn't put that one on here, but he makes a prophecy about the borders of Israel's kingdom, which is after Solomon. And so, if he's making a prophecy of this kingdom, of these borders being extended, it means they have fallen. So they have fallen to a great extent. They're not as big as they were before. But under Solomon's reign is when Israel reached the extent of its largest borders. And so as you can see in the map there, the red outline is where it's presumed that Solomon's kingdom was. It was massive and huge. So it's the biggest it's ever been. It's important to note how Solomon managed this and how his kingdom fell. So we're going to read through Deuteronomy 17, verse 14 to 17. This is God's instructions to his kings. When you come to the land that the Lord your God has given you, and possesses it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me. You may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you, who is not your brother. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many, many horses. Since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. This is what Israel's kings are supposed to do, supposed to do, but this is what Solomon does. 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 22. For a king had a fleet of ships of Tarshish at sea with a fleet of Hiram. Once every 3 years, a fleet of ships of Tarshish used to come bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. Interesting. Then we have 1 Kings chapter 11, verse, I have 1 to 3, I wrote 1 to 2 on here, but now the kingdom of Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonia, and Hittite women, for the nations concerning which the Lord has said to the Israelite people, you shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn your heart after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love. He had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. As you can see, according to Deuteronomy, he did exactly the opposite of that. So that's why his kingdom fell. But also, did you notice where all of his gold came from? It came from Tarshish. The ships of Tarshish, this phrase is mentioned in other areas starting in the Bible, starting in Isaiah. Chapter 2, verse 12 to 16. For the Lord of hosts has a day against all that is proud and lofty, against all that is lifted up, and it shall be brought low, against all the cedars of Lebanon, lofty and lifted up, against all the oaks of Bashan, against the lofty mountains, and against all the uplifted hills, against every high tower, and against every fortified wall, against all the ships of Tarshish, and against all the beautiful craft. In Isaiah chapter 23, verse 1, we have the oracle concerning Tyre. Wail, O ships of Tarshish, for Tyre is laid waste, without house or harbor, for the land of Cyprus is revealed to them. We also have it saying in Psalms 48, verse 4 to 7. It's mentioned a lot. For behold, the kings assembled, they came on together. As soon as they saw it, they were astounded. They were in panic. They took flight. Trembling took hold of them, their anguish of women in labor. By the east wind, you shattered the ships of Tarshish. Shattered the ships of Tarshish. That's a tongue twister. Okay. How is Tarshish viewed? Not very highly, I don't think. A lot of gold. They're a wealthy kingdom. And this is where Solomon's wealth came from, is Tarshish. We can almost say that, you can say that this shows that Solomon's kingdom was a kingdom that he wanted. He built the kingdom that he wanted. He didn't build the kingdom that God wanted him to build. Solomon created his own kingdom. Sorry. Now we have Jonah on his way to Tarshish. Jonah is on his way to Tarshish, maybe because he doesn't want Nineveh to be a part of his kingdom. In order to grasp exactly where Jonah is at, we are going to look into chapter 4 of the book that the whole video missed completely. Jonah chapter 4, verse 1 to 4. But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry. And he prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, is it not this what I said when I was yet in my country? This is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish. For I knew that you were a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. And the Lord said, do you do well to be angry? I don't know why, Shelby, but I think about if you when this verse comes on. Not because of the anger, but because God always seems to be asking you a question. Right? So I had to come to this. Do you love it when God asks you a question? Maybe when God asks you a question, something is probably wrong. You know what this also reminds me of? Is Jesus. Because when the Pharisees ask him a question, he responds with a question back. So, like father, like son in a way. But here it shows that Jonah is also very angry with God for showing mercy to a city he thinks does not deserve it. God is not bringing the justice that Jonah thinks he should bring. It is easy, really easy actually, to sit here, look back at this, and think, man, this guy is missing the whole point, right? He's missing everything. Like, this is not what God is about. Like, he should be thankful that Nineveh is forgiven. The point is so obvious. There's this quote from Philip Carey that he wrote a big, commentary on this book, and it came out of this. He says, Jonah does have a point that the wicked shouldn't avoid justice. You can look at Jonah and say he is crazy, but maybe there's a different aspect that this reader is trying to get out. And that may be to expose a shameful something we are all engaging in, but don't want to acknowledge that we do it. Jonah appears to be stuck in his ways and not backing down. Moving on to verses 5 to 11. This is where it gets really good. Jonah went out of the city and sat to the east of the city and made a. I changed this, I think. Oh, and made a booth. Okay. He made a booth for himself, also known as a Sukkot in Hebrew. He sat in the shade till he should see what would happen to the city. Now the Lord God appointed a plant and made it come over Jonah, that it might be a shade over his head to save him from his discomfort. So Jonah was exceedingly glad because of this plant. When dawn came up the next day, God appointed a worm that attacked the plants that withered. When the sun arose, God appointed a scorching east wind, and the sun beat down on the head of Jonah so that he was faint. And he asked that he might die and said, "It is better for me to die than to live." But God said to Jonah, "Do you do well, angry for the plant?" And he said, "Yes, I do well to be angry enough to die." And the Lord said, "You pity the plant, for which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow, which came into being in a night and perished in a night. Should I pity Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 people who do not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle?" Okay, there's a lot going on here. Jonah first builds himself a shelter, which I've told you in Hebrew is a Sukkot. This is mentioned first, maybe not mentioned first, but is mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 13 to 15. I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to try and sum it up, but it's right there for you to read. It is actually a feast of Sukkot. For 7 days, in verse 14, it says, "Everyone shall rejoice with you in Sukkot." Yeah, interesting, eh? Zechariah 14, verse 16, it says, "All nations." Then everyone who survives of all the nations that have come against Jerusalem shall go up year after year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the feast of Sukkot. All nations. Jonah built his own Sukkot, or Sukkah, but still feels that Nineveh does not belong underneath this God's kingdom. He built his own Sukkot. He doesn't want Nineveh in there. But if you noticed that Jonah is not rejoicing, he should be rejoicing. It's actually, this is the only, I think this is the only time and the only festival that God says to rejoice in. I can't see where it is in there, but it's in there somewhere. Jonah's not rejoicing either way. He's not rejoicing, but Nineveh is. I kind of find that very strange that Nineveh is rejoicing and Jonah is not. He's sitting on top of this mountain, fully frustrated with God. I feel like we are there sometimes at some points. I know I am. I don't know about you, but you guys are sitting there. It's like, God, why aren't you doing anything? Do something. Act now. All right, we're going to move on to the plant, though. Now that we've covered the tent, we're going to move on to the plant. Psalms 121, verse 5. "The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand." In verse 6 of chapter 4 of Jonah, God proceeds to make a plant grow to provide shade for Jonah over his head. But it doesn't even last that long, as God takes it away when he appoints the worm to eat it. God is your shade. God tries to use this point to Jonah that he is his shade. God is his shade. God is his comforter. But in verse 8, an east wind blows through. Whoops, too early. Verse 8 of chapter of Jonah chapter 4, verse 8, an east wind blows through. The word east wind has a very ominous association to divine judgment that appears in multiple parts of the Bible. We have famine caused by the east wind in Genesis 41, verse 6. I don't think I included it on there, but I did not. The locusts are brought in by an east wind in Exodus 10, verse 13. God sends an east wind to part the waters and destroy the Egyptians in Exodus 14, verse 21. The ships of Tarshish are broken by an east wind in Ezekiel 27, verse 26, and Psalms 48, verse 7, which we read earlier. It is thought that in this moment, Jonah's tent was taken down by this east wind. But like you also noticed, that the east wind struck Jonah and not Nineveh. Divine judgment came on Jonah, as it appears. After this, Jonah again wishes he was dead. And it is again in this moment, he doesn't want to talk about Nineveh anymore. God asks him a question again. Is it right for you to be angry about the plant? We're done talking about Nineveh. We're on to the plant now. Jonah sure thinks it is. He's right. He has a rightful. He is right to be angry at the plant for dying. I don't know. It is also important to note that the plant is the only good thing to happen to Jonah in this whole story. He's been on a ship, thrown into sea, eaten by a fish, spit up on shore, walked to Nineveh, and comes to a mountain and gets his shelter taken away. The plant is the only good thing to happen to Jonah in this story. But Jonah did not make the plant. He did not make it great. God said if you can have so much emotional connection with a plant that has only been around for maybe 24 hours, why can I not have compassion on Nineveh? Nineveh's been around for years. Can I have pity on them? Now we've gone through the whole story. What can we learn from this? I have 3 things that I've learned throughout this year that I'm just going to point out. And this is kind of in my conclusion, but I've got a long conclusion. 3 things. Number 1, God is not our vending machine. Jonah did what God asked him to do, but with a completely different attitude and intention from what God had intended and wanted. I picture in my head that Jonah went to the mountainside and said, okay, God, I did what you wanted me to do, now you do what I want. This is a give and take type of scenario. This is such a simple concept. I mean, you go to work every day and you get paid, whether bi-weekly or monthly. You go do something, you get paid for it. It's kind of maybe engraved in ourselves, but maybe Jonah's doing the same thing here. God, I've done something for you, now you do something for me, right? Such a simple concept, and we live it out. Sorry. We often need a reminder that we need to live our lives out in faith, that sometimes the things we do may not be rewarded or the outcome that we want, because it might not be what God wants. Sometimes we do things with intentions of having something, but the outcome is completely different. I think we can find ourselves appreciating as well, this ties into this, appreciating the gifts or the blessings more than the one that gave them to us. Jonah really appreciated that plant, but not God so much. He had a lot of anger towards God and towards the plant when it died. God is wanting to be in conversation with you and doesn't want you to just know about him and what he can do for you. He is a conversational God wanting to interact with us on a personal level, and this is why prayer is so important. All right, number 2. Bless you. God is not our vessel. God is not our vessel to destroy or avenge our earthly enemies. As you may know, Nineveh is not what you call a good city. It has conflict with Israel. This leads you to think the reason that Jonah did not want to go to Nineveh was because it was such a cruel and dark place, filled with evil, and if he goes there, he may die because of it. I mean, I've always thought that. If he goes to Nineveh, he's going to die because it's a cruel city. But if you look at Jonah's story, I don't think he was afraid of dying. He was willingly thrown off a boat, knowing there would be no rescue for him at the end of that. Do you think if you jump off a boat, is there going to be a whale that's going to eat you up and spit you out on shore? That's don't think he had that in mind. That was not in his mind. But so he willingly jumped off that boat and was willing to die, with no expectations of surviving. I mean, he's in the middle of like an ocean. I don't know if I can tread water that long. There's also nothing profound about his message in Nineveh. Simply that it would be destroyed in 3 days. He's like, you're going to die. Like, that's it. No, he told nothing. He said, you're going to die in 3 days. And like, to me, that would sound like a personal attack against them. It's like, you're going to die. If you tell somebody they're going to die, they're going to want to attack you, so you die. So I don't think Jonah was afraid of dying at the hands of the Ninevites. He also states in chapter 4 that he'd rather die 3 times, all because Nineveh was shown mercy, and they had repented. Just as God shows you mercy and desires you to be close with him, and just as he showed Jonah mercy in picking up from a whale, bringing him back to Nineveh and giving him a second chance, say, hey, listen, he desires to show the same for you and for your enemies. He's shown mercy to the Ninevites who had fallen so far away. Just as Jonah, they were both heading in opposite directions. We are to abolish sin, not the sinner. If you find yourself far from the Lord, like there's no way back, I'm telling you there is. Just like Nineveh, you can ask for forgiveness. Our God is a conversational God. Even though the Ninevites didn't know God or how he would respond, they still repented, and God showed mercy. Last but not least, number 3. We are chosen. This one stumps me a little bit. I always find myself saying we are chosen, but what does it actually mean to be chosen? What does it actually look like to live this in this mindset of being chosen? And to answer this, we need to know why we are chosen. We need to know why we were chosen. And I think looking back, we can see that all the people God had chosen to intervene were in times where evil was great and lots of innocent blood was being shed. Just like we see in Jonah was called to Nineveh because of its great evil. To speak against the sin and not the God, to speak against the sin and not the people. God chose and called the nation of Israel to bring the light into this world because no matter what, we will sin, as we read in Genesis, where God promised never to flood the earth again because we will always be sinners. The reason why we were chosen is simple, and that is that there is a great evil in this world. There is a great work to be done, but the how is a little more complicated. It's a little more complicated. How do we do this? We're called because there's great evil, but how do we deal with this? In Exodus chapter 19, verse 5-6, says this to the nation of Israel of what they are to do. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be treasured possessions among all peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and holy nations. These are the words you shall speak to the people of Israel. What's the role of a priest? The role of a priest is to repair relationships between 2 parties. The only 2 parties here are God and the nations. This priesthood is extended to you. Extended to everyone. And it says this in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9-10. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, and a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you have not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Peter is saying, now that you've received mercy from God, you now have a special role of declaring the praises of him who called you out of darkness into the light. This is written to a people outside the nation of Israel, a mixed group of Jesus followers. Our purpose as chosen people in the simplest form is to extend God's inclusive love to many. God has chosen, I always feel like this is really weird, God has chosen, but God has chosen you to be the light to your friends and family. My family and my friends are different than your family and your friends. God has chosen you to be a light among your family and your friends. and the people around you. God has chosen the church to be a light to its community, chosen the churches to be the light to their community. And I want to say this, but it sounds really weird, but to intervene. Like, Israel was meant to intervene with the world and to bring God's love and like light to the rest of the world. We're to intervene and stop and try and like abolish sin so that the people can see who God is. And God has chosen the body of Christ to be the light of the world. We are not here to pass judgment. Do I have any more? Nope. Slideshow. We are not here to pass judgment like Jonah has on Nineveh. We are to proclaim God's love and mercy and let God do the judging. So often I find myself just sitting here and being like, God, do something. Like, what's going on? And this makes me think that there is so much going on in this world. Can you imagine how much innocent blood is being spilled? Like all these aborted babies, all this war, all this violence. This has to be crying out to God. Like you can go back to the Old Testament, innocent blood crying out to God consistently, all the time. I sit here and wonder, like, well, God, what are you doing? Why are you letting this happen? But I think this shows how merciful God is, even to his enemies. How much he actually, not only how merciful he is to his enemies, but how merciful it is to us to actually act on this kind of stuff too, right? Sometimes we sit here and watch and wait when we should be maybe doing something. I don't know what it looks like. I'm just saying we should be doing something in love. We should be doing something, but we shouldn't be rooting for our enemy's defeat. By sitting on the mountainside like Jonah, but acting in love. So my encouragement and my goal to you is let's be the chosen people God has intended us to be, a light for all people. Are you running to Tarshish or are you going to Nineveh? That is all I have for you today. Let's bow in a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day, and I thank you for just a great long weekend and a great rest that we could have. And I just pray for all the people that are in this church and for in this community, in this world, Father, that we could be your light and we could be your vessel of not judgment, but your vessel of love and grace and peace to all, and that we do live out as your chosen people are supposed to be lived out. And I just pray for the blessing the rest of the day and for, I don't know, whatever we have going on. I don't know. Your name. Amen.